Cahokia, the city. Long before the arrival of Europeans and centuries before the founding of cities like New York or Washington, there was another great city, rising out of the fertile Mississippi floodplain. It stood not in legend, but in earth and wood, a city born of vision, built by hand and aligned with the stars. Its name, remembered now only through modern archaeology, was Cahokia. Cahokia was not a footnote in the story of ancient America. It was a capital, a religious center, a cultural experiment. At its height, in the 11th and 12th centuries, it was the largest urban settlement north of Mesoamerica, a city larger than London at the time. With tens of thousands of residents, towering earth mounds, vast plazas, and an intricate network of beliefs and symbols, Cahokia was a center of life and meaning. The mounds remain today, covered in grass, rising silently from the landscape just outside present-day St. Louis. They are the last great witnesses to a forgotten civilization. These were not burial mounds alone, though some were. They were temples, platforms, and markers of cosmology. Cahokia was built with intent. Homes, rituals, ceremonies, power, and play, all arranged with precision. This chapter sets the stage for the journey to come, a deep dive into a city that defies stereotypes about pre-Columbian North America. It asks the reader to see indigenous history not as fragmented, but as rich, urban, organized, and deeply spiritual. Cahokia is not myth. It was real. A city of people who planted maize, raised children, buried their dead with ceremony, and looked to the skies for guidance. To understand Cahokia is to understand that America's history did not begin with European ships. It began in places like this, in cities of earth and fire, memory, and meaning. Before there was Cahokia, there were the roots of Cahokia, the scattered villages, seasonal camps, and sacred places that stretched across the central woodlands for generations. Life in the centuries leading up to the city's rise was not simple, but it was more dispersed. Families and small communities lived close to rivers, farming the three sisters, maize, beans, and squash. They hunted deer, fished in the backwaters, and moved with the seasons. But change was brewing. Slowly, maize agriculture began to intensify. Settlements grew slightly larger. Pottery styles began to unify. Trade networks widened. Across the land there was a quiet hum, the early signs of centralization, of belief systems aligning, of social complexity preparing to leap. These centuries were not a prelude in a passive sense. They were active centuries of experimentation, innovation, and spiritual searching. People were starting to build small mounds, conduct new forms of burial, and create iconography that hinted at more powerful beings and more structured beliefs. The land itself, the floodplain near the Mississippi, offered a fertile canvas. With its rich soil, abundant water, and strategic position between regions, it was the perfect place for something larger to emerge. And when it came, it would come quickly. It happened suddenly. Around AD 1050, the Mississippi Valley exploded into something new. Small villages vanished. People moved by the thousands into a central place. Forests were cleared. Fields expanded. Earth was moved by hand in staggering quantities. This was the birth of Cahokia. In a generation, a city was built. At its heart stood Monk's Mound, the largest earthen structure in North America. Around it, dozens of smaller mounds, ceremonial plazas, and wooden post circles, known as woodhenges, were laid out with mathematical precision. This was not random growth. It was urban planning inspired by cosmology. Why did this happen? The causes are debated, but the impact is clear. This was a cultural revolution. A religious vision, possibly led by a prophet-like figure, reshaped life. The people did not just build a city, they entered a new worldview. Time was marked by the sun. Space was sacred. Rulers were more than administrators. They were mediators between earth and sky. At Mound 72, a ruler was buried with shell beads shaped like a falcon. Dozens of sacrificial victims were buried nearby. This was not casual ceremony. It was a society operating on deeply spiritual terms, a city built with belief as its mortar. With vision came structure. Cahokia's builders did more than erect mounds. They organized a civilization. Monk's Mound rose like a sacred mountain, topped with a large wooden building, perhaps a temple or palace. In front of it stretched a plaza larger than 35 football fields. To the west stood Woodhenge, giant timber circles aligned to solstices, tracking the sun's journey and marking seasonal rituals. Neighborhoods formed in rings around the sacred center. Houses were made of wood and clay. Some sat within palisaded compounds, possibly for elite families. Others clustered near communal courtyards, where food was shared and crafts were made. The city pulsed with activity. There were potters and hunters, dancers and priests. People worked together to maintain fields and raise buildings, but they also participated in communal rites, solstice gatherings, funerals, and perhaps competitive games like Chunky, played with polished stone discs. It was not a static place. New mounds were added, temples were rebuilt. The landscape was a canvas constantly in use, reshaped each generation to reflect living memory. Power in Cahokia was not enforced by armies. It flowed from the sacred. Rulers lived atop mounds, elevated not just physically, but cosmologically. They were probably seen as linked to divine beings, especially the powerful Birdman figure that appears on artifacts and engravings. Part raptor, part man, part force of transformation. Their power was made visible through ritual performance. Ceremonies and plazas were dramatic, dancing, feasting, sacrifice. The leader didn't just govern, he appeared as the center of a cosmic order. Authority was ritualized, repeated, reaffirmed. There were elite neighborhoods, palisaded and filled with exotic goods, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf. These materials signaled reach and status. Rulers controlled the flow of goods and ideas. They presided over feasts, supervised burials, and organized citywide rituals. But their power depended on cosmic balance. If the sun failed to rise in the right place, if floods destroyed crops, or celestial signs turned dark, power could erode. Rulership in Cahokia was powerful, but fragile, bound to divine timing. Cahokia did not stand alone. It was the epicenter of a cultural network that stretched across eastern North America. From Minnesota to Florida, from the plains to the Appalachians, Cahokian-style artifacts appear. Pottery, figurines, engraved shells, and sacred symbols. The city's influence moved through pilgrimage, trade, and shared belief. Other mound centers arose, some clearly inspired by Cahokia's design. These were not colonies, but regional interpretations. Cahokia's myths spread. The Birdman, the Weeping Eye, the World Tree, all appeared in distant places. The reach of Cahokia was spiritual as much as material. It became a model for sacred leadership, for urbanism shaped by the sky. It was America's first cultural beacon. Most Cahokians were not elites. They were farmers, mothers, builders, hunters, children. Their homes were modest, rectangular structures of clay and wood, arranged in clusters with shared spaces and gardens. Maize was the staple crop, but the diet included squash, beans, nuts, berries, deer, fish, and waterfowl. Women farmed, cooked, and managed homes. Men hunted, built, and participated in rituals. Children played with toys and learned trades. Life was spiritual. Offerings were buried beneath doorways. Seasons were marked with ceremony. The sacred was woven into the ordinary. There was hardship, malnutrition, labor, disease, but there was also joy, story, rhythm. These were people who lived in deep relation to their land and sky. By AD 1300, things began to change. Climate shifts brought droughts and floods. Crops failed. Rituals lost their resonance. Woodhenges were no longer rebuilt. Mounds were left unfinished. Neighborhoods emptied. The cosmic order began to fray. Signs of violence appear. Internal strife, perhaps, not foreign invasion. People stopped building and started leaving. The population dropped. A new generation, unmoored from the rituals of old, quietly drifted away. By 1400, the city was abandoned. The mounds were silent, the plazas empty. The city that once pulsed with sacred energy faded into grassy hills and memory. For centuries, Cahokia lay forgotten. Early European settlers marveled at the mounds, but dismissed them as the work of a lost race. It wasn't until the 19th and 20th centuries that archaeologists began to uncover the truth. Excavations revealed post holes, plazas, burials, pottery, evidence of a planned, sacred urban landscape. Slowly, Cahokia emerged from the soil as America's first city. Yet for too long, it remained absent from history books. Today, it is being reclaimed, not only by archaeologists, but by native peoples who see in its mounds the stories and spirits of their ancestors. It is not a dead place. It is a living memory. Cahokia's story is not one of mystery. It is one of brilliance. It shows that cities did not begin with colonists, but with indigenous visionaries. That religion and science, art and agriculture came together here, long before European maps drew borders on this land. Its legacy challenges what we value. It asks us to remember. It urges us to see that ancient America was filled with complexity, beauty, and wisdom. The mounds still rise. The memory still breathes. Cahokia was and is a center of the American story. And now we remember.